Have you ever wondered what really fueled America's incredible rise to a global superpower? We all know the classic story: a nation built on liberty, innovation, and the pursuit of happiness. It's a powerful narrative, one that has inspired millions. But what if I told you there's a darker, more complex side to this story? A side that's often left out of the textbooks, but is aptly stabstudily kreutztouting how the United States because we about to peel back the layers and explore the uncomfortable truths behind America's rise. Let's start at the very beginning with the land itself. Before European colonists arrived, North America was home to millions of indigenous people, with diverse cultures and thriving societies that had existed for thousands of years. The arrival of colonists marked the beginning of a centuries-long tragedy. It wasn't just a peaceful settlement. It was a conquest. European powers, and later the U.S. government, systematically displaced and decimated Native American populations. This was done through brutal wars, broken treaties, and forced relocations like the infamous Trail of Tears, where thousands of Cherokee, Choctaw, and other nations perished on a forced march from their ancestral lands. The concept of manifest destiny, the belief that American expansion was divinely ordained, served as the ideological justification for this continental conquest. This expansion wasn't just about territory. It was about resources. The vast lands, the timber, the minerals, all of this wealth was built on the foundation of dispossessed indigenous land. This acquisition of land and resources was the first, and perhaps most fundamental, step in building the nation's economic power. Now, let's talk about the economic engine that powered early America, especially in the South, the institution of chattel slavery. For over 240 years, millions of Africans were forcibly brought to the Americas in the horrific transatlantic slave trade. They were treated not as human beings, but as property to be bought, sold, and exploited for their labor. Their unpaid work, primarily on plantations growing lucrative cash crops like cotton, tobacco, and sugar, created immense wealth. In fact, by 1860, the value of enslaved people in the United States was greater than the value of all the nation's factories, railroads, and banks combined. Cotton, in particular, was the oil of the 19th century. It fueled the Industrial Revolution, not just in America, but also in Britain. The textile mills in the North, the shipping industry, the insurance companies, they were all deeply entangled in the slave economy. So, when we talk about America's economic takeoff, we cannot ignore the fact that it was built on the backs of enslaved people. This brutal system of exploitation generated the capital that financed America's westward expansion and industrial development. It's a foundational part of the economic story, a dark truth that fundamentally shaped the nation's wealth and its enduring racial inequalities. As the 19th century ended and the 20th began, America entered a new phase of expansion. This time, it wasn't just about continental territory, but about global influence. The Spanish-American War in 1898 is a key turning point. The U.S. intervened in Cuba's fight for independence from Spain and emerged from the short war with a new empire, acquiring Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. This marked America's arrival as a world power, but it came at a cost for the people in those territories. In the Philippines, for example, what began as a promise of liberation from Spanish rule turned into a brutal and bloody war of colonization by the U.S., resulting in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Filipinos. This pattern of intervention continued throughout the 20th century, especially in Latin America. The United States frequently used its military and economic power to protect its business interests, often supporting authoritarian regimes and overthrowing democratically elected governments that were seen as a threat to American corporations, like the United Fruit Company. These actions were often framed as a fight against communism during the Cold War, but the underlying motive was frequently economic dominance. This global expansion secured access to new markets, cheap labor, and vital resources, further cementing America's position at the top of the global economic ladder. Parallel to this global expansion, another kind of exploitation was happening right at home. The Gilded Age and the early 20th century saw the rise of massive industrial fortunes. The names are legendary: Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt. They built empires in oil, steel, and railroads that transformed the American landscape. But this industrial boom was powered by a workforce that faced grueling and dangerous conditions for very little pay. Millions of workers, including recent immigrants and even children, toiled for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, in unsafe factories and mines. There were no weekends, no paid vacation, no workplace safety regulations as we know them today. When workers tried to organize into unions to demand better wages and safer conditions, they were often met with violent opposition from company owners, private security forces, and sometimes even the government itself. Events like the Haymarket Affair, the Pullman Strike, and the Ludlow Massacre are stark reminders of the bloody struggle for workers' rights. The immense wealth of the industrial tycoons and the rapid growth of the American economy were directly subsidized by the exploitation of this labor force. The prosperity enjoyed by some was built upon the hardship and sacrifice of many. Finally, we have to look at the role of war. It's an uncomfortable reality, but the two world wars were instrumental in catapulting the United States into its position as the world's sole superpower. Before World War I, America was a rising power, but Britain was still the dominant global force. The war devastated Europe's economies, while the US profited by supplying the Allies and emerged from the conflict as a major creditor nation. The transformation was even more dramatic after World War II, while the rest of the industrialized world lay in ruins. The the US went from manufacturing tanks and planes to producing cars and consumer goods for a world desperate to rebuild. The Marshall Plan, which helped rebuild Western Europe, also created huge markets for American goods. The US dollar became the world's reserve currency, and new global institutions like the World Bank and the IMF were established, with the US in the driver's seat. America effectively designed the post-war global economic and political order, an order from which it benefited enormously. The military-industrial complex, which President Eisenhower warned about, became a permanent feature of the American economy, creating a powerful incentive for continued military spending and global intervention. So, when we look back, the story of America's rise is far from simple. It's a story of incredible innovation, ambition, and a genuine belief in ideals of freedom. But it's also a story stained by conquest, slavery, exploitation, and war. Acknowledging these dark truths isn't about diminishing the nation's achievements or being unpatriotic. It's about having an honest and complete understanding of history. It helps society with the deep-seated inequalities and complex global role by confronting the uncomfortable parts of our past. We can better understand the present and hopefully work towards building a more just and equitable future. What are your thoughts on this? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you found this insightful, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into history.